Hi, this is Tim Bedore, and you're watching the Break It Down show, I assume right now.
Yes, live, baby,
Good.
live. You know how we do live,
Live
Tim.
is good.
Yeah, live is good. We were just talking off mic, and I didn't want to waste this goodness, but we come from a time and in a part of the nation where modern rock, new wave, where that stuff broke, and it was your work with all of your peers, Big Rick Stewart, all those guys that
Mhm.
Alex Bennett. Oh my God, I mean, the changes that were made in the industry, the brilliant people that realized that this music was coming out and it was changing things. It and especially with the Quake. I mean, look, we'll talk about which was it was at one point hot hits
Yeah,
KITS, and then
yeah.
like they took the Quake format. But let's talk a little bit about the Quake just to pay the bills for folks who don't know, and then also say hey to everybody from the Quake world. I grew up in that time in that city place, and it's magical. So let's spend some time talking about the Quake.
You know, what was interesting and sad, actually, when you think of it, what radio did and didn't do, um, radio should have been the Quake. That music was what was happening in that time. Sadly, radio decided to just get older, rock radio, with baby boomers. And so in the 90s, by that time, I think this is pretty much true. No radio station played Nirvana, which is really kind of crazy when you think of it. The best music that was out there being made in the 80s, in my mind, the Quake played. And then eventually KITS did too. But by the time the 90s roll around, young people did not look to radio for what was good. It ended. And so eventually radio kind of did too.
Really did, and in part because I watched what's that movie called? It's a documentary. I'll find the name of it here while we're talking. But it's a documentary that talks about the New York side of this thing. Where the imports literally came in into LaGuardia, and they sometimes just pilfered them. And played them first on the radio station, like off in like New Jersey or somewhere on an island. Just
Might have been Long Island.
yeah, Long Island. There you go. It was in Long
Yeah.
Island, and
WLIR.
LIR. Yeah, there you go. And so
Yeah.
they had it was you guys, them, K Rock. This is where
Yeah.
music was broken around the nation in terms of modern rock. It maybe LIR was ahead of you guys, but only just barely, and only because they had a running start. It wasn't like an easy listening channel like KQAK was the Quake. So it's also super short, the time where the Quake existed. They had this viable format, but apparently it wasn't viable because they went back.
It was. Here's the problem. And this may be the backstory that is little known or told, but this is what happened to the Quake. So some guys from Chicago who had run some very successful radio stations there in the 70s decided they wanted to be in ownership as well. They were unfortunately the minority owners. They got a judge from New Jersey to put up the majority of the money that KMPX was sold for and then became the Quake. So this judge from New Jersey had owned maybe one radio station before the Quake. And he unfortunately also owned a bunch of condos that he built next to a swamp in Florida. And the condos were sinking. So he had to do something about that. He pulled all the liquid cash that he had given to the Quake to operate for the first 2-3 years without telling management that the money was gone. So checks started bouncing in incredible amounts right when we came on the air. So advertising, billboard people, TV people, everybody, we owed money. And we basically could not promote after the first 3 months. Everything was just whatever you take in, that's all the budget that you have. So we were behind the 8 ball financially. Even with no promotion, by the time the Quake ends, we were the #1 music station in San Francisco County. So it was successful. And if we hadn't been in debt, we would have been okay. But there was no way to make up the debt. In fact, there were times when, there were promotions where you send in a self-addressed stamped envelope to get tickets to the Alex Bennett Breakfast with Bennett shows. or something. And the reason that they did the promotion was to get all these self-addressed stamped envelopes so we could steam the stamps off to use for postage. That's how tight the money was. And that also, that desperation and that weirdness fueled a lot of what happened on the air. I think management understood they wanted us to be wild, and they hired us specifically because we weren't going to just be time and temp guys and whatever. But you know, if things are so difficult working here and we're not going to get raises, you better let us have some fun on the air. So, and it really just, you know, the Quake just got out there, and part of it was just because of the circumstance.
Yeah. To say you guys were number one doesn't capture it, because it impacted lives, especially, I mean, I don't know, 12, 13, 14 years old. I mean, and like, I had a stereo in my room, I had a radio, and the radio led what I bought for the stereo, you know, and these things were incredible. And the Clash were winding up their career, but boy, oh boy, were they still relevant right there. Yeah. And a movie like Valley Girl comes out. I know they're trying to make, or maybe they've already made a new Valley Girl. There's no way to make that movie today with the music choices that they made back. It was so different, because it was a tidal wave of music coming in that really, truly was modern rock, and that it was the rock of that moment.
Well, and then young people could really own it because it was not something the mainstream media or radio was even playing. So it was more exclusive, you know, and we had that one radio station. You had that one radio station in your area that played, and then the jocks were different. So it really, we did kind of get into people's lives. You can kind of see it. There's a Quake Facebook page, and the comments that people say, you know, really just reminds you that you're in their life, in their youth, and had an impact, you know, like the Big Brother that is on the air and stuff. So yeah, it's a very personal medium. Radio is so potent, just because you are talking to one person at a time.
Alex Bennett, you mentioned him. He was integral to, you know, people from this era, because of what Alex did. You know, he wasn't before Howard Stern, but he was in that mold, in that time. He wasn't a shock jock, but he was just so goddamn cool. Him and Joe Rogelski and all those guys. And they, you know, they did this thing one day where we watched the video for Thriller over the radio, you know, and he and Joe Rogelski would talk it, and it was just so free formed and flow and just goddamn cool. And then he would bring these comedians in. I wasn't even old enough to go to a comedy club, and I was desperate to go to one. I mean, as soon as they would let me get into a car and take a date, I knew to go to a comedy club, because these guys were brilliant. I mean, it wasn't just the music. It was this cold bomb that went off, you know?
Well, when the Quake started, there was in radio at that time, if it wasn't a hits FM station, it was called AOR, Album Oriented Rock.
Right.
And the Quake management, who was very progressive, and I think really good management, actually, they wanted it to be POR, personality oriented radio. So that was always part of the plan. It wasn't just going to be a morning show and then everybody else plays music and shuts up and tells you what the weather is. So it was a lifestyle. That radio station caught San Francisco, the comedy boom. It was part of that, and the music, and it was just part of this whole thing. It did. I thought at first it wasn't going to be cohesive, because Alex wasn't playing music in the morning, and you kind of need to establish with a morning show what it is, what the station is. But comedy was just such a big part of San Francisco in the 80s, and you know, we were integral to that. And then, you know, the comics became personalities, not just people who told jokes. You got to understand who these people were, because they were on day after day after day.
Yeah.
So they became personalities too. So yeah, no, it was a slice of time, that's for sure.
When you were a kid back then, you know, we were like going to high school, or in my case, I was still in middle school, but you were learning about even how to operate a Tower Records. and how to read Rolling Stone so you could figure out what your brand of cool was, because we didn't know, and no one teaches you that. You kind of here's how I discovered the Smiths. A friend of mine named Chris. We were in middle school. It was the summertime. I think it was my senior or my final year in middle school, 83. And he's like, "Are you listening to the Smiths?" And he asked me this because we already knew we let sing. And I don't even know what you're talking about. He's like, "Oh my God, you have to listen to this." And so that's how you find the Smiths in 83 or 82 or whenever it was. All of this word of mouth stuff was powerful. And we did learn about it by listening to getting on in the afternoon. And there's Tim Bedore talking to us and playing. You had more freedom to pick the music you wanted to play too, I would imagine, as opposed to like now you have to play this song from Aerosmith, and God bless Aerosmith, but it seemed like you guys can make more risky choices. Falco is not going to get played on an AOR station.
No. But the odd thing is that mainstream rock didn't play the Plimsolls or the Replacements or even Elvis Costello. And yet in another era, I mean, the Plimsolls were pure power pop rock and roll. I mean, just great songs, but they weren't in the category that rock stations, used. It wasn't Deep Purple or, Molly Hatchet or whatever, was going for rock at the time. So yeah, it wasn't that we were making brilliant choices. If you had ears, you could hear that's a great song. Somebody's going to love this if we play it. So yeah, it was an odd time actually for radio, but it benefited us because we had this unique audience.
When you talk about a band like the Plimsolls or the Go-Go's or any of these other bands that broke this new wave of music, when you hear it now as an adult, I'm like, well, that's just 4/4 rock and roll right there. Yeah. Like a lot of it, like literally not different at all. And so I've always tried to like, what the heck was new wave? And I've talked to Chris Merrick Hughes, who was in Adam and the Ants. He's produced Tears for Fears. He knows what it is. I've talked to other guys. Jack Hughes has been on the show from Wang Chung. Like, what was new wave? So what would you say was new wave? What was this genre or genres of music that you guys were exploring with us?
Well, new wave was a huge mistake. They never should have said this is new. And the bands didn't. The bands, in fact, I interviewed Chrissy Hind once, and she hated the idea and insisted, we're a rock band. Don't call us new wave, because people categorized new wave as this other thing that I am not. And yet, if you listen to Nick Lowe late 70s albums, it's just late 50s, early 60s, just rock and roll. So it was a label that the industry put on this music, and maybe it helped them sell it initially, but the backlash was awful because it became the stuff that we don't like, that the hip kids or the strange kids like. Well, that's always where it starts anyway. Most of these things started that way. Yeah. And, you can almost go back to the anti-disco movement in rock radio. When I was in college, we were playing Boz Scaggs and Joni Mitchell and Bonnie Raitt, as well as Led Zeppelin and so the format could handle all this stuff. Disco comes in, there's the disco backlash, and then rock stations got rid of anything soft, anything Jackson Browne, that just all went boom. And so did I think new wave kind of got tossed in that, and that it's not Molly Hatchet, it's not rock and roll.
Yeah, it's not Blue Oyster Cult,
right.
Which at the time, like when you guys were doing this, they were still like an enormously huge and relevant band. Yeah. And then you have Josie Cotton, asking her if Johnny is queer or not.
Yeah.
And again, that is cutting edge. It doesn't matter what the answer is to that question, just to play that song, especially in that city at that time. We were all it was the dawn of accepting what it was to be homosexual and just part of a community. I mean, all of these things were not what was played on the other channels.
Yeah. So the Quake stood out. It was its own culture.
What was it like between your peers on the other channels? What were they saying to you guys? When you ran into them at the store or DJing things or whatever?
I don't know what they thought of us. I have, some friends, and they knew, you do radio. Sometimes there are some people who are lifers, and they'll go into any format. The next week they're working at the country western station and professing to love the music too.
Right.
That's another thing about the Quake, was that we really did like the music.
Yeah.
I didn't like everything that we played at all. I mean, if you listen to my show, you heard a lot more guitars than you heard synthesizers.
Right.
Play a lot more rock than you would have dance music, but other people were more leaning on the other stuff. But everybody knew, and people were a bit jealous, radio people, of what we got to do. That most stations did not even approach the freedom that we had.
Yeah.
So, in fact, I was talking recently with a guy who was on, one of the top 40 stations, who did afternoons opposite me, and he said, he gave me the compliment that he thought my afternoon show was the best on the air in San Francisco, just because of how much I got to do a thing called the Bible According to Tim, which was like openly questioning religion.
Yeah.
Time after time, and they were fine with it.
Yeah. I want to go back to Alex Bennett for a minute, because you're right. He didn't play music, and it did not matter at all. And that must have drove the old heads, the people who know how to program things, must have drove them crazy. But he had us absolutely paying attention, dreading having to go to, on the way to the last moment, listening to it. Maybe we had a little radio in our hand, because this is pre-Walkman days, or if you did have a Walkman, you certainly couldn't have headphones on at school and everything. He didn't play music, but he did keep us on that station the rest of the day, if at all possible, to listen.
Yeah, I mean, you had people coming on that were intensely interesting and telling stories, telling life stuff. It wasn't just, in fact, it wasn't material. It was conversation. So you're hearing about Bobby Slayton's latest experience, or the girlfriend, so it's just very human. I mean, it's a soap opera. It's, it's a comic soap opera is what it was. So it's very compelling stuff. That's how radio can be.
There's a guy named Rick Carroll who drove a lot of this taste. He was a tastemaker, died way young, but he had his finger on this pulse. And there's a few other people in this world too, but Rick is one of the guys that's recognized, and he's enshrined in halls of fame and that kind of thing. Did you have a chance to meet him? Did you know?
No, he was. We hired him to come up from LA, KQAK. He was the consultant for the first year or so, for 6 months. I met him and partied a little bit, hooked him up with some. He was. As a lot of people in the 80s doing a certain amount of drugs, and he didn't have any connections in town. So it was interesting. We eventually dumped him, one for the money, but he wanted us to stay in the really, really poppy Hazy Fantasy and Fun Boy 3 way longer than we wanted to. We wanted to go with as many REM and Talking Heads songs as you, and he said, no, stay, with the popular. And I said, well, K-Rock's not playing this. Why do we have to play it? And eventually, but as a consultant, he wanted the first 6 months to be, really kind of the hits and not the Ramones and whatever else.
Yeah.
So eventually, and plus we had no money to pay him. So.
Well, and also 6 months would be a gigantic portion of the life of the Quake. I mean, because that would be running out of months pretty quick after that, right?
Yes. Yeah, it was. I think we were on the air with the straightforward AOR for about 2-3 months. Then KFOG came on with a more San Francisco centric version of album rock, which they did very well. And so then we got kind of squeezed out. If KFOG hadn't come on, we probably would have stayed with the more straightforward album rock. That move that KFOG made kind of forced the Quake was thinking of the Rick Carroll format, decided to go with AOR, And then when KFOG came in, they said, yeah, let's go find this exclusives place. And I did.
The Plimsouls, David Bowie, Tom Schilling, all completely different acts.
Yeah.
Two of those acts play a song called Major Tom.
Yeah.
You hear all three of those things in the same hour. And again, this is before the internet. Like if you didn't have access, if you were a kid who couldn't drive or whatever, and you trying to figure out, you went to Tower, it's such a crazy place. All of these things had to align for you to understand who even Tom Schilling was. And if you weren't listening at that one moment, you might miss the name of the guy who you were, gonna have, you were trying to figure out what the song was, like, wait, you say Major, if I call you and I say, hey, Tim, can you play Major Tom? You're going to play David Bowie unless I say Tom Schilling's Major Tom.
Yeah.
Right? All of these things we had to figure out. How hard was it for you guys to figure all this out? As this new music's coming in, there's Peel session records that I remember you played some Peel session records during your thing. Like, this is like a whole new world that, like, we bought shortwave radios to get ahead of this stuff.
Well, I was prior to that and working at some very successful album rock stations. I remember one day I was in Sacramento, it was 1980, and the record reps, I was the music director, the record reps from San Francisco came over and they said, we just want you to have these two records. We know you're not going to get them on the air, but you should have these. And it was the first record by U2, which I did get on the air. And it was the REM's first studio album. Yeah. So, the music director, I'm getting 2020, which had some great songs, Alien, Yellow Pills, and Nuclear Boy, and just all the stuff that they sent and we couldn't play. Well, I took it home. So, I'm listening to these bands, the Nerves and then the Plimsouls, and, stuff over the years. So this stuff's bubbling under for me. And I'd follow the trades and see if it's charting anywhere, if anybody's playing it, see if I can get it on. So yeah, we had absorbed all of that stuff prior. And then, somebody's a big fan of Pete, he'll tell you this, and we exchanged information about, did you know that, this band was that before? And, so yeah, we were into the music. We were fans of the music. Thus, we wanted to hear more about, one of the best days that I had on the Quake, Elvis Costello was on tour. He came in on a Saturday afternoon, brought a big leather satchel of records he got at Village Music in Mill Valley, which he said was the second greatest album record store in the world. And so he's playing music that he thinks we should know or like, and we're talking back and forth about, where he's right, where he's wrong. And it was just this exchange of, he's trying to prove that he's right. And no. So it was just, that's the kind of people that we were. We loved music and wanted to go back and forth.
Yeah. Record stores, again, part of this equation where you would go to, and I'm saying Tower, you could go to the Beat in Sacramento and not only see music you couldn't see anywhere else, but also the posters and the things that hung on the walls there that you could buy. You could buy an Elvis Costello tapestry, and you could transform your world, in this multiple marketplace of items and things. You can spend a lot of money on black shirts, from a lot of different bands. That also seems to have gone away, where like you're in this, because then you're there and you're going to meet some guy from a town that you're not from. And then you're going to become friends, even though you don't. It was our social networking area in that record store, in those bins. Hey, when is this going to get here? When do you get your new records? Are you going to get the stylistics, the style council, and whatever? Right? You were actively pursuing things just to get anything new.
No, it was very lifestyle oriented, and the other element of that was the dance. That was never my thing, but we were huge into the dance clubs that were big in San Francisco at the time. So it's very much a lifestyle station. And you can do that. You can get into people's lives pretty heavily.
There are so many archival records of every single one of your Jed the Fish, all these other guys who did things on the air. It was recorded. Did you have a sense of that? And when you think about it, 40 years later,
Yeah,
people that still have and are reproducing and putting tape. Oh my God, that's crazy.
No, the other thing, the bad side of working in radio and the Quake, you're working 6 days a week, just wrung out, needed a break, didn't get one because they couldn't afford part-timers. I mean, so it's just in the moment. I mean, it's just, that's all. And I was doing stand-up at night, stand-up comedy at night. So, there's 1,000 things going on, but it was interesting. Everybody on that station, I mean, I didn't want one break to go by where I didn't say something different than anybody else in radio that day. I just tried to focus on something special, even if it's the calls at the top of the hour, just something that's a little unique. And that's just the pattern you got into. You got just, that was your deal. So we were wrung out. You couldn't see the big picture at all. It was just like, how do I make it through tomorrow?
Yeah. What would you tell that era self about this job that he's doing? I mean, especially considering that there's little kids recording everything you say. Would you, look, I prefer if you didn't say, I wouldn't change a thing, but seriously, like, what would you tell yourself back then? What would be your advice?
I'm just always impressed with a station like that, how much you are part of, for better or worse, especially young people, teens, whatever, part of their life. I mean, people remember things I said 40 years ago. I mean, it's just crazy. So it's almost a responsibility and an opportunity.
Yeah.
Whether you're shaping young minds or whatever it is, one of the great things that came out of the Quake was that San Francisco had a comedy explosion and clubs and all. We got to work, all over the place and actually make money doing it. So yeah, I mean, you have a chance to push comedy or music. I mean, Bill Graham's organization probably spent more money with us than any radio station because we would put butts in seats.
Yeah.
We sold tickets.
Attention. We wanted what you guys were putting on the air. And again, like it was, okay, here comes Tim. Now here comes, and then we knew the lineup. I mean, we knew who you guys were. We loved the choices that you were making. And in a lot of ways, I mean, you're about 13 years older than me. So, you were kind of like a big brother, and all of you guys were, maybe not Alex so much. Alex had a different thing going on, but in terms of like the musical choices, I swear to God, we were taking notes, not just recording. I mean, and making tapes, but we were learning. My buddy Corey and I would do our own little make-believe radio show. We would take a headset, like the headphones, and we realized that they were two-way, so we could record with the headphones as a mic. And we would just do our own little crazy, insane DJs. And look, here I am today doing a form of that now, as a profession. It is remarkable that time. And you talk about U2 and REM. I remember being in middle school, and these are like the first moments of my own. Like, I didn't choose this music because someone else thought it was cool. I chose this music because it resonated with me. I chose The Clash because it was there being played, and I'm like, this makes sense to me for whatever reason. That's just the age I was in, but I wasn't drawn to Aerosmith. I wasn't drawn to Metallica. It's, they grew up 25 miles away from where I lived, but it was this music, that Elvis Costello. Anything that guy said or did, I wanted to know about it because he knew it was cool.
Yeah, and so where did the rest of rock radio go? I thought, to the superficial and stuff that hasn't lasted.
Yeah.
I mean, Elvis Costello clearly is still making music, and that music I still listen to. I listened to the Plimsouls the other day. It holds up. But you could probably look at our playlist and see a bunch of stuff that didn't hold up too. But no, I think we were playing the bigger talent people.
Mhm.
David Byrne, easily more talented than anybody in all those other bands. Deep Purple, yes, they could play. All right, fine. But
some of it hasn't aged well, though. I mean, Duran Duran was a monster band, but their stuff is dated. I mean, they still can play it, and we still love it and everything. There's a lot of bands like that. Psychedelic Furs didn't really kind of age terribly well, unless you love that music already. Some of it is timeless, but a lot of it isn't. The Alarm didn't seem to hold up, even though they're great.
Yeah.
And very rock and roll centric. They just were 80% as good as the bands that were better than them, I think, maybe.
Yeah, no, and one of the things that makes listening to 80s music at times difficult was the production techniques that they used that are not timeless. They're the audio equivalent of a members only jacket or skinny tie or big hair product hair.
Right.
It sounded right in the moment, but it didn't do the longevity of that music any favors by doing it that way. But I don't think, REM never did that, and the Plimsolls never did that. And, there was just a lot of music that was well done that you can still listen to. There are some things. I listened to Tim Scott Swear the other day. I have the album. And as much as I liked that song, it does sound like an 80s production. I wish it hadn't been that. But it was a great song.
Yeah. I could talk about this stuff all day, but I also want to get back to the modern times. And you mentioned comedy, so I'm going to transition. But before I do that, just everybody, if you can, if you're watching the show and you're new to this, or if you're a Quake centric kind of person, you're watching, just right below there is the link to my YouTube page. It'd be great if you subscribed. If you are so inclined, go to breakitdownshow.com, click the PayPal link. That's how you can support me directly. I don't need Patreon. I don't need anybody else. I just need you and me. And you guys help support me so I can stay busy. I'll go on the road. I'll go grab more interviews. And I'm not trying to make $1 billion here, and I'm asking for small amounts. But every month, if you gave me $5, that might fill my tank up and send me on, go get you something incredible. So that's what I'm asking for that. Let's get into the modern times, Tim, because you mentioned that you were able to do comedy. Did you do a lot of middle school, high school DJing from dances? And then how much comedy were you trying to do back then, or did you grow into that world?
No, I think, I loved radio. I used to fall asleep with the transistor in the pillow and listen to WLS out of Chicago, because at night you could get it in Wisconsin where I was growing up. Radio just got in my bones, but I don't think I ever saw it necessarily as the end game. People like David Letterman, Johnny Carson, they went from radio to TV to national TV. I started, and I've always loved humor. So I started having comics on my show in Sacramento, then Houston, then San Francisco, and I started doing stand-up. The clubs that invite me out, I was always wanting to do it, but if they hadn't invited me and comics said, you should do this, you should try it, I probably would not have been too shy to try it. But it just is wide open as the Quake was. Stand-up is clearly just way more personal and wide open. You can say what you want to say. And it was just such a fun group of people. By the time I got to San Francisco and got in with those people, this is what I wanted to do, because you're working at night. I could play golf during the day, softball during the day. And when I was in radio, I literally didn't get a chance to do those things most of the time. So suddenly there's this freedom, and, it's very, stand-up is very kind of semi-addictive in that it's fun. It's this game of, is this weird concept going to connect or fail? A lot of excitement. There's just something unique about it. So
yeah, back to the Alex Bennett thing. It's the access to these comics. And one of the coolest things about Alex was you could sit in the audience.
Mm,
You could play hooky from school or do
yeah.
whatever you're doing, and then you're looking at Will Durst. You
Yeah.
know, like, I felt like I knew Bobby Slayton. I still feel like it. I still feel
Yeah.
like me and Slayton are friends. And then I bet if I approached him, you know, he'd probably be like, "Yeah, man, I get it. We all had a great time." You know, and there's so many comedians from that era, and I'll forget all of them, but there's a guy named Tree that was on that
Yeah.
was hilarious, and just all these different. Who was the guitar playing guy? Dr. Somebody.
Dr. Gonzo.
Yeah, there you go. Dr. Gonzo was great.
Yeah.
So you had all these people. Did the station help you establish that connection with the community, or was it external stuff for you that got you into those guys?
Alex was at KMEL before, and he was having comics on. I don't think to the extent, but the Quake management knew, and they built the studio so there could be 20, 30 people in the audience. And they were both compatible one with the other. We supported them, but the comics, you know, without the comics, 6 to 10 a.m., what was Alex doing?
Yeah.
So it was, you know, really good synergy. And they wanted me, the management, to be doing stuff in the afternoon and have comics on as well. And I did, you know. In fact, I think the first time Jay Leno ever interviewed somebody on the air was on my show.
Wow.
We had Jay dropped in, and he was so hot at the time as a comic. And I'd had him on and done shows with him before. And then so he was at the other cafe. He drops in to say hello. He wants to plug his gig. Fine. And then we had General Public was coming on at the top of the hour. They were doing a concert, and we didn't want to lose Jay. So I had him come over to my side of the control board. We sat next to each other, and we interviewed General Public. And, you know, that was probably the first time he ever interviewed anybody in the air. And we did well. He did well. In fact, so they come in, Twakeling and Ranking Roger, and so you got white guys with dreadlocks and black guys with blonde hair. They're the hippest people in the world, and Jay does not look like a hip guy, never did. And he looks at these guys and he says, you know, we did the same stuff. Basically, you know, you do music, I do comedy, but people are paying to see you. Don't you find it's just 2% of the kids that are bad? And they are stunned, but everybody in the studio, the management radio people had crammed into the studio to want to see this combination. They knew that he was joking. They broke out laughing. Then the band knew it was a joke. And it was just a great interview. We had great fun interviewing General Public. So we started Jay's broadcasting career.
You launched him. And if I managed to wrangle Jay on the air, you're going to co-host with me. You're going to remind me.
Yeah, there you go. He owes me.
Career, kid. I made you.
Yeah. Get out of here.
No, that is the kind of stuff that used to happen on radio, not just at the Quake or KITS or whatever, but that you could have that happen.
But most stations would not have been that loose to try. I mean, the parameters were wider for us. That's why that happened. That we would say,
yeah,
stick around and let's do this.
I'm curious. We'll get back to comedy in a minute, but I'm curious about this. Some acts just don't make it, right? And without a Quake, without a LIR, without a K-Rock, you know, like if K-Rock found you, you were made. I mean, whether it was Sugar Ray, no doubt locally, or an act from all over the world, if they found you, they could break any act. I don't know if it's true for the Quake because you guys weren't around long enough to really know about all that stuff. But does a band like The Cure find success? And then why doesn't Susie Quattro or Paul Weller find success here when they are fantastically successful in the UK?
The Cure, that was an amazing, because again, nobody really in radio was playing them nationally. They sold out Dodger Stadium.
Yes.
Dodger Stadium.
Yeah.
I mean, few bands ever get close to that. So they connected in a deep, deep emotional way with a huge chunk of people that age at that time. Weller and the Jam, obviously, Style Council, brilliant stuff. Big in the UK. Had a hard time getting it on the air. In fact, I think the one Jam song I got on the air was either That's Entertainment or A Town Called Malice or something. And it just, didn't sell any units. Therefore, we're not going to play it anymore, Tim. I'm sorry. No. So some of it's cultural.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, The Cure with all the goth stuff and the angst and whatever, and the Smiths too. I mean, Morrissey definitely dove deep into that emotional strain and people responded. But yeah, it is something how they did connect without a lot of radio support, because let's face it, there were a handful of stations playing that kind of music and that was it.
And The Cure in general, just if you look at what it took for them to actually break out, 85, I mean, they were already 4 or 5 albums in, like you might know about Three Imaginary Boys if you were cool, but most everybody found them after Let's Go to Bed. And so even if you're playing it, it still took a while for us as a population to catch on to just how incredible they were. And they weren't terribly radio friendly, to all the radio stations benefit. A 50-second intro, is a little tough to swallow.
Yeah, but I know they have, if you look at their singles collection album from that time, it was, I mean, I think he was making music to have a single and get on the radio. MTV, obviously huge factor in anybody surviving Nirvana in the 90s. And I don't know if they played, I never watched it in the 80s. So did they play Cure videos? I don't know, but part of it, one, he's prolific. They churned out a lot of quality material, so you have a chance to connect. Some of the other people you mentioned were kind of one-off, or you just lose your record contract and you get into record. You have even that opportunity, to get any momentum going. So that's part of it. I mean, you look at. There were some great bands. 2020 was one of my favorite late 70s bands. And they were on major label, couple of records, but then it's over. And something happened to them, or not happened.
Yeah. What about Suzi Quatro? She was so damn cool. She was Leather Tuscadero. Everything is there for her to erupt. And she is... I don't think there is a female front woman who plays any instrument before her. I think she is the nexus of that.
Yeah, and probably didn't fit a format. I mean, I almost wonder if the Quake would have been even right, because in my memory there was a little bit too much costumey kind of stuff going on. Sometimes you just have that one chance, and that first impression that you get, whether it's good or not. I mean, she may have paid for the rest of her career by one bad choice.
Whether it was about Paul Weller, that's exactly like that. He was coming over, the Jam was about to make it, and they were on the East Coast, and he basically spit on all the reporters that came to break their band. And they're like, fair enough. F you, Paul Weller, and who knows?
Yeah.
It does seem on message for him. And yet, I mean, you can't argue with the career. You can't be a better musician, more prolific than that guy.
No.
And then same thing with Suzi Quatro. I think she's 65 million albums sold.
Yeah.
Come on. Like that's as good as you could ever hope. And that's the old units. That's not new times when you can sell 200 millions of a song.
Right.
This is like the old days when you were selling 10, 12, 15 songs at a time. It's an incredible body of work. Not relevant here in the US though.
Yeah. Yeah, no, without a doubt. The Squeeze was one of my favorite bands.
Yeah.
And XTC. So far more successful in England.
Yeah.
And Squeeze is, it's intelligent pop. It's pop art. And how did it not make it? But
packed with incredible Difford and Tilburg. Okay, well, that's just the beginning.
Yeah.
Jules Holland. I mean, on and on and on.
Yeah.
Incredible musicians that could do anything. And yeah, I mean, the Squeeze never really, they toured, but you know, it's like the Specials had something that we never quite got. And some of it, you know, is the political stuff. Like I found out about Nelson Mandela because of
Yes.
Specials, you know. But
well, let me tell you this.
Yeah.
I found out we were playing the song, and one day on the radio, I just said, "Who is this Nelson Mandela? And let's help him out wherever he is. I don't know what he's about." And so the phone starts ringing, and I go, "Oh, geez, I'm sorry. It's a bad situation."
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I remember playing that record, and it, you know, had passion and whatever, and I liked it. I just didn't know who he was at the time.
Yeah. It opens doors, though. It allows us to see a band like UB40 and hear a different message. And it's the, you know, just to get that whole scene, because the music scene in the UK is so much more complicated. It's not a big place compared to the United States, but boy, is it complex in terms of culture and different groups vying for each other's attention. Or it's.
But here's an interesting thing about that in England, if you get on Peel's show, because the BBC is all over,
right?
That's what America didn't have. We never had a network. But if you got on the BBC, and then Peel obviously was supportive of a lot of quality. He broke XTC. He broke a lot of people.
Yeah.
So there's your leg up.
Yeah.
That he can play whatever he wants, and he's not, you know, 40 years after Aerosmith is released, playing an Aerosmith mini concert because it's 40 years old. He's going to play what's currently new and intriguing him. So yeah, that's a big advantage over there.
Yeah. Boy, if you went down that rabbit hole and you got into Peel sessions, you know, I mean, you just had your mind blown. And then you look at the dates and line it up and like, well, he knew about this 7 years ago, you know, like it was a body of work. Let's get back to comedy, because it's a weird time for comedy. One of the things we do here, and I'd love to have you come out and play. We have a room in Temecula. We do a comedy for a cause thing for Save the Brave. We definitely kind of mentioned that. And we have just the best time in this room. And I don't want to say the room is political, but because comedy is so charged, there's a lot of jokes that you can tell in our room, because we can all it's a bunch of combat guys. You know, you're not really going to pass us off and everything. But comedy has become an interesting spot. Joe Rogan made the news last week because he used the N-word. But Joe Rogan's a professional. He's a comedian. He can use whatever damn word he wants because he's a man of words. It's his job to make us uncomfortable with the word because he knows how to work it. I'm going to see Dave Chappelle at the Hollywood Bowl. You know, you don't get a better experience. I mean, that's one of those things that could become one of those magic moments. So comedy's doing fine, but comedy's not doing fine.
You know, it's, I think part of the problem definitely is that some people went way too far, took the easy route, the shock route, been doing it for years in stand-up. So they may have ruined it for everybody when it was, you know, either too vile or too stupid or too shocking because they didn't want to put the work in or didn't have anything really to say. But we're definitely in fact, I just wrote a piece for my podcast that I'm blaming all of the partisanship in America on participation trophies. So it's kind of a tenuous link, but it's, you know, everybody's gotten into their own teeny space. It's all about the individual. It's not about the greater good. I mean, when I started, you know, you could go into Orange County and do Reagan jokes and critical stuff. They didn't care, you know, because it was a comedy club and we're all just laughing at each other's stuff. But now, if you want to do that, you risk whether or not you're going to be banned, get on or off, you know, certain platforms and all that. It's that way with everything. I mean, whether you eat meat or how you treat your pet, you know, just all of the things. People have rolled down their windows. You know, you shouldn't have your dog out right now. It's too hot. I mean, everybody's just got their own opinion, and they're willing to tell you.
Yeah, my dog disagrees.
Yes. See?
Yeah, I mean the whole thing, and I don't want to turn this into a political conversation, but the whole thing about people being in other people's business all the damn time, and then digging up dead people. I'll use Laura Ingalls Wilder as an example, and deciding that she was a horrible person. The lady's been dead for 60, 70 years, I think.
Yeah.
So we're not talking about real things. We're talking about make-believe things, and then also old offenses from old times and old things. I watched Greg Giraldo do a fantastic roast of Pam Anderson, and he talked about her getting canceled, but he meant from TV.
Yeah.
And it's like the words have even changed, and in such a fast time, because he's not even been dead maybe but 10 years, right? And so the things that people were saying even 5 years ago have a completely different meaning because we've become so hypersensitive to things. I don't, maybe it is participation trophies. And I remember as a kid, I wasn't a terribly good athlete at first, but I practiced and I worked and I practiced. And I never was like a big, gigantic trophy getter, but sometimes the teams I was on, I won, and I treasure those trophies. Mm-hmm. The other like certificate for like achievement or presence or whatever I got in the military, whatever. I throw it in a book somewhere. I don't ever think about them, but those special earned things. Oh my God. I mean, I can picture right now in my mind's eye, the championship trophy from a little league team. The last trophy I got was so special to me.
I think, to me, the individual view of thing, it tracks very well with, there was a time when there were only 3 networks and PBS and maybe an independent station if you were in a big town. Just like the BBC in England, there's a central voice, and now there is no central voice at all. I mean, everybody's in their individual information silos. And if you stay in that silo for 2-3 weeks hearing a thing, when you hear the counter to it, you've heard 1,000 times that Al Gore said he invented the internet. You hear the explanation that he didn't, but your brain 1,000 times. And so that's what you believe. So I think as cable and, the internet and all that kind of thing has taken over, we're getting more and more into our own space. And thus we can be insulted by things now that would not have been even remotely insulting to hear on the radio or on the stage, which is not to say that there are things we shouldn't say anymore, or we didn't realize that this was, something that hurt. But just today, I put something on Facebook the other day saying, watching the Olympics, biathlon, cross-country skiing and shooting, wouldn't it be better if it was ski jumping and shooting? Yes. That's much more watchable, where the guy's flying in the air and has to shoot a shotgun and then land. And I got a message from someone saying that hurt me because I was babysitting one of our biathletes, and his story is so compelling. And it's like, well, yeah, but it was just a joke.
Yeah. I read that post.
And it shouldn't have hurt anybody, but it did.
Yeah. Have we, so all of these things, our media is definitely more divided. Like we all used to watch Happy Days, every single buddy, all used to watch 60 Minutes. Tens of millions of people will watch these shows. And I struggle with this concept, and it's really hard to maybe you'll have something to say, but diversity is the antonym of unity. And you can't just go to one side or the other. You have to strike some kind of tolerant balance where we're diverse enough, which the US is great at that. We're like a self-populating diversity machine. We don't have to really work that hard at that part of it, but we do seem to have to work, at least right now, on the unity thing a little more. What are your thoughts on diversity versus unity?
Well, the wonderful thing about the American culture and why we were so potent was that you have nothing but diversity in our population, all kinds of different, and we've always had it, influences with Japanese and Chinese people coming here, building railroads, and the Irish and the Italians later, all this influence, but they all wanted to fit in and be Americans. Mm-hmm. And we had the media that was giving us what it was giving us, just basically 3 networks and radio stations playing music at the time. That was a great combination. Think about it. Bob Dylan, John Lennon, Paul McCartney, they're listening to all these different elements, but they all wanted to be on the radio.
Yeah.
They wanted hits. So you're an artist, you're an individual, you're very creative, you're not just moderately talented, you're super talented, and yet I want to appeal to everybody.
Yeah.
And so you get a Letterman, you get Mel Brooks at his best, not the worst, but the best.
Yeah.
So that combination was so potent when you think that Dylan's listening to, I mean, he can talk about the folkiest folk stuff, but he wants to get on the radio too.
Yeah.
That combination is wonderful. It's when we get too into our, no, I just want to hear the Irish folk music. I don't, whatever it would be.
Yeah.
And I kind of, to me, the internet is the villain. It really is.
I thought it was the cores. Fuck the cores.
No, it was the internet. I mean, it was supposed to be this great, and it is. It's wonderful, but people just get into, we don't read the paper anymore. We don't have 3 networks. We're just disparate. Boom, boom, boom. So, yeah.
I want to say out loud, because this is the other thing. Like, someone might record a comedy bit, play it out of context. And I love the cores. I actually do.
Mm-hmm.
Their music. I think they're beautiful. Yeah. I was just making a funny joke because we're talking about Irish folk music, and so the chorus again that came to mind. Please don't get mad at me. But you have to even do that stuff now. You have to say slavery was wrong, and then you could talk about the history of slavery. Like, we have to condition everything, and it's like, I don't know, man. We're getting further from the problem and more towards the performance of why we're okay to talk about something, and I just don't think that's a good way to go. It's hilarious for you comedians, though, to be able to make fun of that.
But well, I'll give you an example of where I think it's a problem. So 24 plus years ago, my daughter's about to be born. We do the ultrasound. We find out that we're having a daughter. And my first reaction was, I hope she's a lesbian, because it just hit me that boys, sex, I was one of the nice guys, and I was horny beyond belief. And the girls' fathers trusted me, and they shouldn't have, because I presented well, but I was just as bad as everybody else. And I just panicked. It was like, God, I hope she's a lesbian. So I've been doing that routine ever since, one way or another. And then she goes off to college, and it's like frat boys, and don't, just been in a panic about that.
Yeah.
And just be nice to my daughter. I did that routine in Mill Valley, and it was just the stunned silence when I said, I hope she's a lesbian.
Yeah.
And it's not that they don't support choice and whatever, they do. I think because of my age, they just didn't know where I was coming from.
Right.
They didn't trust. They judged based on the word.
Oh, it's the worst.
And it was like, are you kidding me? I'm saying I want my daughter to be a lesbian. And now that she's 24, can we nurture her into being a lesbian? Because she just got dumped by this guy in real life, and it was horribly painful. And I don't think women would do that to one another. Now, maybe they would, but it couldn't have been more positive. And it was like, well, we don't know if we trust you because you're a baby boomer.
Oh my God. There's so many things to talk about with this. The fact that lesbians are now an out group, and the fact that they're like, hey, we don't want dudes in our sports. And this is not, I'm just giving an example here.
Yeah.
But, that's become a real problem for people, and if you're in a comedy club, you just don't quit trying so hard, well, a little bit.
Either judge or give the benefit of the doubt, or what are we all doing here?
Yeah. What are we all doing here? Right? Yeah. I mean, that's part of this problem with this whole thing is, we're so quick to decide. So I wrote an academic article about female empowerment in conflict zones and how ultimately it's unethical to do it, because we don't take the time and take it seriously, right? That's like the thing. Okay, who cares about that? When I would present this paper, or if I would like flout the idea out to someone who's an academic professional, I would already be in a fight. And they wanted to like they wanted to determine how to put me in a box. They're like, which women are we talking about? And they'd be very angry, like, whoa, hold on. We're just having a conversation about the concept of a paper. And they're like, but what women are we talking? Well, we're talking about their women, the host nation women. Well, they're already empowered. And I'm like, yeah, we can't even have the conversation because you've decided I'm an asshole before we've even started.
Well, and it's part of the world of, we judge things.
Yeah.
We give a like, we give an emoji, we give a response. And I believe this is absolutely true, that the response on social media is like a car horn.
Oh boy. Yeah.
Where you will beep and you will flip someone off.
Yes. I love it.
So easy. But if you knew that you were going to meet them at the grocery store 2 minutes from now, you would never do that.
Yeah.
You would never be that angry. And it's the protection of being in your car, and we're not going to be together. In fact, they took the horns out of cars in Sweden like 20 years ago. Accidents went down.
Yeah.
Because people were not forcing you to stop by beeping, I'm coming through.
Yeah. Yeah.
So they had to drive without that communication, and car accidents went down.
Yeah.
So the internet, I think it's making us divided more than it was supposed to be. I mean, the people that are brought together are of like mind.
Yeah.
And anybody who's not in the group is just so bad, doesn't get it. We can't talk to you. Yeah, it's a divisive thing.
It is. I don't want to take too much more of your time, but I do want to say this out loud. I'm working on a paper concept for a paper where software writers are trying to encode ethics into the software, into the behavior, into the cryptocurrency things that they're trying to do. And it terrifies me because you better know what the hell you're doing, because ethics are not only situational, they're transactional and they're positional. So you're trying to capture all these things that, it's I don't know that we are, maybe at some point we'll be smart enough to do it, but I don't think that we are, but we sure believe that we are. And then you create these outcomes that are the opposite of what you actually designed.
Well, and so much of it's generational. I think part of the PC problem is, and this is stuff I love talking about. I've actually done a number of my podcasts, which is called An Agnostic's Guide to Heaven. And all these topics I talk about under the guise of being a life coach and a spiritual guru, but it's the storytelling is what it is. That it's so situational, where people will make these judgments and without any idea that you're being ironic. Baby boomers, the detached ironic comment where you're saying something that you mean something that is the opposite of what you're saying, is maybe part of the problem, because younger generations just take what you're saying literally. So some of it's generational. I hated puns, but my dad's generation loved puns. Puns were just everything, like big band music. And then all of a sudden it was like, Dad, stop with the puns. That's not funny. Tim, you're a comedian. That's fun. No, Dad, it's a pun. It can't be funny. So, maybe baby boomers have aged out with irony.
Yeah.
But it's really kind of sad that people look at, irony is such a rich concept comedically, and it's kind of hurt or lost.
If you go to Audible, and you can listen to Tim's podcast anywhere, it's on Apple, it's everywhere. Just type in An Agnostic Guide to Heaven, Agnostic's Guide to Heaven. You'll get his stuff there. Plug whatever else you're working on right now, Tim. And thank you.
Well, we're in a pandemic and it's -7, so I'm inside. I've not taken. In fact, I just had a gig offered last Saturday and I turned it down. So yeah, I'm just sitting home for the time being, working on the podcast. I really enjoy the writing of it. sometimes I have a story to tell. Sometimes I just get onto a topic and then things just flow and come out that wouldn't have come out had I not sat down. So it's been fun that way. But
Good.
I'll get back out doing stand-up. It's too much fun.
Yeah, it is. It's fun. And then we've been hosting these things, and we had Kevin Callan on. And oh my God, him and Kevin McNamara broke the room apart. One of the best comedy nights I've had. You get to a point, and you'll get this. Once you've been to enough comedy shows, I have a good time, but I'm not like, oh my God, I had the greatest time of my life like you are when you're young. It was one of those nights where it was so good and so wonderful. You wake up the next day and you're just still having a great time. We need more of that. So my encouragement to everybody is go out and see live music. Yeah, if you have not been to your local symphony, go to that thing. There's incredible art going on there, and definitely get to your comedy clubs, because these folks are desperate to go on stage and perform for people, and you feel it. It's always wonderful. Go ahead.
And if, in particular, restaurants, bars, comedy clubs, there may not be coming back because they don't have a lot of money in the bank. The symphony can go to the city and say, but your local comedy club does not have that option. So if you want stand-up comedy in the future, figure out a way to help out your local comedy club.
Yeah, put a comedy show together. It's just not that hard, because comedians, you know what they say? They say yes. So I'm gonna bug Tim off mic to come do our show. You guys all have a great time. I'm gonna run this reel. Hold on one sec, Tim.
Okay.
Hey, thanks for watching the show. I really appreciate it. Right here, you can subscribe. Please do that. It makes the show grow. Hit that notification bell so you know which incredible guest is coming up next. Down below is the PayPal link. You can put a small subscription in. That is an enormous help. All that money goes right back into the show. And then right up over here are the next episodes you should listen to, curated by yours truly. Thank you so much